My name's Alan Durant, and I'm an author of children's books and books for young adults. And I'm here today talking to my lovely and very talented daughter Amy, who is the publisher and editorial director of the digital first publishing house, Sapere Books. So Amy, tell us a bit about that.
Hello. Sapere Books was launched in March 2018, and we publish adult fiction in the genres mainly of historical fiction, crime fiction and romantic fiction.
Great. Now, obviously, I write for children, so I guess there will be differences in the way that you approach publishers, perhaps in the children's and the adult world. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think there will be principles that are the same. So what I want to ask you, perhaps first of all, is what are you kind of looking for in this kind of submission pack from a would-be author?
So on our website we have very clear submission guidelines. So the first thing would be making sure someone has actually read those. I mean, we're very clear, we only publish certain genres and they're all on the website. So if anyone sends in a submission not in those genres, then it would be a no straight away. And also just compare, when you're trying to address it personally, your submission pack, and just make sure you followed all the guidelines that each publisher or agent has listed, because there are small differences between them. So yeah, make sure you pay a lot of attention to that.
Okay, and are there any real don'ts in terms of submitting?
Yeah, like I said, try and get a personalised name. Think about who you're submitting to. If you haven't got a personalised name, don't ever send it to Dear Sirs, because most of the people working in publishing are women, and that will really put their backs up. I mean, it really shouldn't be that hard to find a name, so and it'll be worth it for the 10-20 minutes that takes. I mean, if you're not sure, you can even ring up or email the general switchboard first to make sure you get the name. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's something I always advise people to do when I'm talking about, when people ask me about how do I go about submitting. It seems to me that it's really important to get to know who you're submitting to, and not just the individual person, but also the company, if it's a publisher or it's an agent. Knowing what they're looking for and what they're not looking for. So there's no point in sending, to you, I don't know, a novel about cookery or something.
Yeah. Or a children's book.
Or a children's book.
Yeah.
Children's book. I'll send them a children's book. No, you wouldn't do that. So it's really important, I think, to know that. I remember, for instance, when I was first submitting for my very first book, all those many years ago, that I found out the names of editors who I knew worked on young adult fiction, and addressed my letters to them, and also tried to, I looked at what they were publishing so that I could make some kind of reference to that in my covering letter. So you kind of feel like you taking some interest in them and what they publish, and that you're not just sending it to everybody, even though you probably are sending it to everybody.
Although I guess now for children's, most people would need an agent, right? So it would be slightly different.
Yeah, it would be. That's the thing has changed. Everyone would need an agent. I guess it's the same in the adult world. I mean, is it?
Not well. It depends. If you want to be published by the big five, meaning the most well-known publishing houses, then yes, pretty much without exception, you'll need an agent for that. But there are a lot of smaller presses, both print and digital, that do accept submissions direct from authors. So always have a look on their websites and see. But I mean, for some authors, getting an agent is a goal that's really important, and some are happy to do it on their own. So something to think about.
And do you think it's different? The procedure's different from between sort of traditional print publishing and digital publishing.
Well, I guess the main difference is that normally you'll need that agent in the middle. So you're pitching to an agent, and an agent will decide where the best publisher for you would be. It's something that you wouldn't have to think about. Whereas with smaller publishers in digital, you'll be researching publishers yourself and trying to figure out if they're a good fit for you and if you're a good fit for them, and bypassing the agent stage. So that's probably the main difference.
Okay, that's good. And in terms of what and when okay, so when you go past the sort of submission pack and all that, and then when you're now sort of reading, obviously you then get maybe the letter that you're looking at, and we already said, don't say dear sirs, that kind of thing, and also obviously important to be careful about checking your letter for mistakes and making sure it sounds good, it doesn't sound, the English doesn't sound bad, because I guess that's pretty much, you're just not going to, you're going to say, you're not going to get read. And so roughly how many manuscripts would you say you get unsolicited rather than coming through agents per month? So?
Per month, it probably ranges somewhere between every month 30 and 200. I mean, the upper end would be when we put out an article in a writing magazine or something, and then obviously that there's a spike there. But so we get a lot, and that's not unusual. I think, publishers, no matter the size of the company, they're pretty overwhelmed with submissions. So you do need to make sure you don't give them a reason to just get rid of you straight away. You want to, pass that first check.
I mean, I remember when I used to work at Walker Books, we would sit down once a month and go through unsolicited manuscripts. I could just get a body of people together. And in a way, you didn't have to be an absolute expert, because I've certainly found, it was my experience, that actually you could tell from about the first 2 sentences whether something was going to be viable or not. Yeah. I mean, not whether it was publishable, but just whether you thought it was actually worth going on to the next stage of getting someone else to read it. And I think, probably that was true of about 95% of the submissions. So which obviously also means that the start of a story, I mean, all of these also were children's books we were reading, which were like picture books, much shorter anyway. But they weren't all. There were quite a few fiction titles as well, longer fiction titles, and you can tell quickly from that. So I guess the start, we all know that is the start of a story, is really important.
It is, although I get the feeling that authors put so much care into those opening chapters, or however much you're allowed to submit, and then the cover letter and synopsis can be a bit of a rushed afterthought. And actually, I'd say it's the other way round, that really the cover letter and the synopsis need to be perfect. And the first 3 chapters, there's more leeway, because obviously you're just, as a reader of those chapters, you know that they're just a sample, and a good editor might even change where the book starts and a lot of the content. So really, it's particularly now that there's so much information online, there's loads of people who have free blogs out there that can tell you exactly how to lay out your cover letter and what to include in your synopsis. So make sure you take a lot of time over that.
Yeah, because I think that's interesting, the whole thing about the synopsis, because I was talking about this last night on a Zoom chat, and people were talking about the fact that everyone says it should just be 1 page long for a novel.
1 to 2, I would say. Well, again, do whatever they say on their website. If they've said 1 page, keep it to 1 page. But I would say 1 to 2 pages, and you don't need to include every little detail. But obviously, you need to include the major plot points. But it shouldn't be descriptive. You're writing. I think authors really struggle with synopsis, because you're writing completely differently to how you've written your novel. All those kind of adjectives and all the nice creative writing is stripped out. You can literally start by bullet pointing all the key plot points and then just turn that into sentences. It can read quite dull, but that's fine. It's just like a formula for the editor or agent to see exactly what happens in the story.
So you don't think it's a way of really kind of bigging the book up and make it sound fantastic and exciting and brilliant, and flouncing everything up and stuff?
Definitely not. No. You want a little bit of that maybe in the cover letter. So in the cover letter, normally your first line would be, you need to try and, in 1 short sentence, capture exactly what your book is and what makes it stand out, which is also really hard to do. And then put a very short, snappy blurb in the cover letter, a bit like what you would think would be on the back of the book. Yeah. And that's the more creative bit. But in the synopsis, then really keep it really quite boring. Okay,
and I think that's really, really good advice, actually. And I remember when I worked at Walker Books, and I worked in as a blurb writer, and one of the things that struck me about that was that authors are terrible at writing blurbs, as you're saying about writing synopses. Yeah, and it's because their idea of what's really going to sell this book isn't actually what's going to sell the book. Okay, you kind of get you hook them in, the reader or whoever's looking to buy the book, and then on the back of that they're going to read or what all the things that you hoped that they were going to get from the book.
Yeah.
And so I often had quite a few battles with authors who wanted to have a certain kind of blurb, and I said, well, you can have that blurb if you like, but no one's going to pick the book up. You know. So I think that's a really good point. But I always remember this thing about you would try and get, you know, one line in a way that really started the book. I mean, if one or two lines really kind of got to the heart of the book, and it's not telling you what the book's about, but it's kind of trying to get to the heart of what it is that this book is. You know?
Yeah, specifically the genre. I mean, I think if you're not writing literary fiction and you're finding it hard to say what genre you're writing in, then that's a problem. I mean, you need to be able to eloquently describe what your book is and where it would be positioned in the market. So if it's cross genre, that's fine, but make sure you know what those subgenres are and what you're talking about when an agent comes to ask you about that.
And do you think that that's okay? I mean, it's interesting again about cross genre, because obviously there are quite a lot of cross genre books people write, but I know that someone told me recently they had a book rejected by an agent, and that one of the major reason for it was that they said the problem is this is crossovers over too many genres, and we find that really difficult to sell.
I mean, yeah, the fact she said too many genres is a bit of a warning bell, because if you're trying to do like historical, science fiction, fantasy, horror, romance, crime story, then I can't imagine what your target market is. But if you're doing, you know, like a time slip romance novel that's like half set in historical period, half set in modern day, for example, like those are very popular at the moment. So it's just making sure you know if there's nothing like your book out there, there's probably a reason for that. Like I say, unless you're writing very high literary stuff, in which case you can be much more experimental.
Okay. So I actually that's pretty covered the main things there. I just it's really interesting, but I think because it's the thing that people are always asking, you know, how do I, you know, the covering letter, how important it is, how do I go about that? The synopsis, what should be in the synopsis? How many words should it be? What should it do? And I think actually that you've really answered that, I think, really well. And I think the whole idea about putting a blurb in, so you kind of sell the book as well.
Yeah.
You know, maybe in your covering letter, which is what I would always advise as well.
I mean, definitely get it checked as well. I mean, if you know anyone in the industry that you can ask a favour from, then that helps. But just even if it's just to like friends or family, like make sure it's been proofread by a few people. And if you're part of a writing group or something, you know, get their feedback on it, get some advice. It's worth it.
And I just interesting, you know, say of those, say 200 manuscripts you might get a month, how many do you think might possibly be publishable?
I mean, more than, so we obviously have a limit on how many we can accept at one time, so we'd be overwhelmed. I mean, but I do turn down quite a few that if I had unlimited resources, there's a good chance we would have published, but we just don't. So we get quite a few good quality ones. I think just because one person has rejected you, I wouldn't give up. It just means there could be any number of reasons why they can't at that time. So just keep trying.
I'm not going to suggest that. I don't want to make a suggestion that it's easier to get published digitally. But do you think there are more opportunities to get published in the digital?
I think there are just generally now than there would have been before digital publishing. So just more small companies, and yeah, like I say, you can submit direct to these publishers. So okay, the dream might be to be published by the major publishers, but if you get nowhere, we're trying to get an agent and it's not working, then definitely think about researching small publishers and going direct.
And obviously things like, another thing I was going to talk to you about is the kind of way the royalties work in digital publishing, because they're quite different, aren't they, from print publishing? Obviously, I'm a traditionally published author. I get 10% in hardback, I get 7.5% in paperback, except of course when I do picture books, and then I get 3.75% because that's shared, obviously 50%. How does it work in your area of publishing?
Well, generally you'll find that smaller publishers and digital publishers will give you a much more generous royalty rate, partly because they can't pay the big advances that the other guys pay, although those are being cut more and more. So that's narrowing a bit. But definitely, you know, if you're lucky enough to get a few different offers, definitely compare those royalty rates, because if the advances are massive, actually you might be better off with a higher royalty rate than a much smaller one and a small advance. So, I mean, the Society of Authors is a really good place to go if you're a member, and they can look over your contract for you and things like that. So, yeah, get some feedback on contracts. And just be, I mean, generally, if you're not with an agent, the most important thing is to be wary of contracts, because some very dodgy clauses get pushed through to loan authors that would never have gone through an agent. So I would definitely, anything that looks wrong or sounds wrong, definitely get some advice on before you sign it.
Yeah, I actually think that's really good advice. I know you've come across examples recently of people who've kind of signed really quite hideous contracts, I guess, because they were really desperate to get published, and obviously lots of people are, and they didn't really read the contract properly, and it's really kind of caused a major upheaval in their lives in a really bad way, you know. So I think you're right. It's really important that you know what you're signing, and that think, you know, because there are some unscrupulous people out there, and you have to be careful.
Definitely.
Well, the other thing I was going to ask you about is what your understanding of copyright is. I often get people saying to me, "Look, if I send my manuscript to a publisher, how do I know they just won't steal it?"
I mean, I've heard this before, and I just find it bizarre because, I mean, the effort to do that, like, it just wouldn't be worth it. And obviously I can't speak for all publishers, but if I liked your book, I want to publish you because I also want a future writing partnership with you. I would hope that you would be able to write more books. So I've never heard of this happening, but I know there's quite a few authors who seem to have this fear, but I'm not really sure where it comes from.
Because I think I heard somewhere legally, once you've typed, or if you've written something, you've typed it out, that's your copyright.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. I mean, I suppose if you're really worried, I don't know if there's a way you can send a copy to yourself so that it's there on record that, you know, your name on it and that it's your manuscript.
I mean, the thing is, I think there's no way a publisher would just publish under a different name your direct manuscript, because that would be provable to be. I think what people are worried about is publishers stealing ideas, maybe. I mean, the problem is that's very hard to prove, because how can you prove that a different writer didn't come up with a very similar idea? I mean, there's lots of similar books out there, so you may think a publisher stole your idea. It might just be that another writer had a similar concept at a similar time, and I find it hard to believe that a publisher would steal.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think so either. I mean, I had a very pertinent case actually in my world, is that I did a book called Unfortunately, which was sent around a lot of publishers, and they didn't really go for it until my agent put an illustrator with it. But after it had come out, about 6 months after it had come out, another book came out with exactly the same concept, called Fortunately, Unfortunately. And I was like, what's this about? And, you know, people do have the same ideas. I mean, okay, I was a little bit worried because I think the publisher who published it had seen my manuscript, but maybe they turned it down because they already had one on their books. You know, so you can't know. And I think you do have to accept that people have, you know, people are going to have the same ideas. You know, there's lots of people writing and thinking and trying to produce stuff. So I agree with you. I think people get too worried about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a risk you have to take as well, really. It's just part of the... I mean, if there are websites, I think there's one called Absolute Right, but that may have shut down, where you can... Or even if you just Google a publisher's name and put reviews, like you can see pretty quickly if they've got anything... If they've got a lot of negative things being said about them, then just don't submit. Any of the more legit ones, I can't see that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a good idea. You know, do some Googling, do some research to see who these publishers are and what their reviews are. Because obviously if they're getting lots of bad reviews, then probably better to stay well clear.
Definitely.
Okay, good. Well, I hope anybody who watches this video will find that of some kind of use, of interest. So thank you very much, Amy, for your kind input.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.